What's the scariest hallucination that you have ever experienced? Story 1 had a patient with Lewy body dementia, not schizophrenia, but it produced horrific hallucinations. I was working the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my office was close to her room. She would scream and scream and scream all night long. I would go and sit with her and ask her if something was scaring her. She saw people waiting in the shadows in the corner of her room. She heard them laughing. She saw their faces contorting. She felt rats crawling up and down her body. She felt them crawling into her and violating her, biting her from the inside, then coming out of her eyes. She was still pretty with it, and you were able to have lucid conversations with her. She had a sense of humor like you would not believe. She knew what she was experiencing were hallucinations, but that did not make them any less real to her. Eventually, she stopped being able to discern what was real and what was not. She died a few months ago. I worked with her for 2 years and miss her every single day, but I am grateful that she is no longer suffering. Story 2. I was in school, like 10th grade, and I had been hearing voices for a bit now, to the point that I was almost getting used to the fact that I hear things others do not. I remember getting up from my desk to use the toilet, and when I got out of the room, I saw this man with no face, just standing there facing me. At first, I just thought my eyes were messing with me, so I blinked a couple times, shook my head a little bit, and looked back, and he was gone. There was no way he could have moved in those empty, silent hallways without me hearing it, but he was gone. So I just went to the bathroom, thinking it was kind of weird, but not thinking too much about it. I even joked with myself that now I was seeing things too. But when I got to the bathroom, he was there again, standing in the doorway. I stopped and just kind of stared for a second, more curious than anything. Then I thought maybe he was just wearing a mask or something, and I asked if he could move over and let me into the bathroom. Then this other kid came out and asked who I was talking to, right as he walked straight through the faceless guy. I just stood there speechless, because what do you even say in that situation? The kid looked at me like I was weird, then just walked away. The guy with no face moved over to let me by, and I gave him as wide a berth as I could while I went in, never taking my eyes off him. He followed me into the bathroom, and a few seconds later, this girl walked in, and I began telling her that she was in the wrong bathroom, since I am a guy, when I noticed that she did not have a face either. They both began walking toward me, and at that point I was pretty terrified, so I went and hid in one of the stalls and cried uncontrollably, because at that point I realized that I was pretty much losing my grip on reality. I did not come out until the staff came and talked me into it. The two of them, the guy and the girl, show up every now and again. I have since graduated and moved away from there, but they still show up wherever I am. They never do anything, so I do not know what to make of it. But that first time scared me more than anything else ever has. Story 3. My friend in college was schizophrenic. We were once hanging out in his dorm room at night, maybe around 11 p.m. or midnight, and he got up to go to the bathroom. He opened the door and stopped, staring at the empty hallway. He asked me to come to the door and tell him if something seemed weird. I walked up to the door and saw nothing strange in the hall and told him so. He asked me if I could hear something, and I said no. He said he heard muffled crying or arguing or something coming from down the hall, and he saw a pitch-black hallway when it was actually fully lit. He said the hall was black, not just dark or dimly lit. At this point, he was shaking, and I was terrified because I did not know he was sick, and we were both on the verge of tears. I am not even sure he knew he was sick at the time. I ended up walking him to the bathroom and then spending the night in his room because he could still hear someone crying in the hall. I thought for the longest time that he was pulling my leg, but he ended up going to therapy and getting on medication very shortly after that night, so it was a terrifying and very real moment for him too. Story 4, Snipers. One Friday evening, I was watching television and happened to be playing with a flashlight that I had left on the coffee table. Boom! Next thing I knew, I was in a full-blown hallucination. I heard a special forces team outside the window as they were sneaking through my backyard. I flashed the light around the room, and they got quiet, and they misunderstood my intent, thinking the light was mounted on a rifle. Next thing I knew, they were calling me outside as part of a SWAT response, and I was on my hands and knees on my porch in the dead of night, begging them not to shoot me. I must have stayed out there about 2 hours with my hands locked behind my head as the snipers got more and more nervous about what I might do. Eventually, they decided there was no way to defuse the situation, and they shot me. I spent about 5 minutes lying dead on my front porch, then crawled inside my house to die. I phoned my mom to let her know that I had been shot and that special forces had killed me. Needless to say, she was not buying it and talked me back down to reality a little bit, but that was not the end of it. She had me go to the emergency room and stayed with me on the phone until I got there. I was still in full-blown hallucination mode, so while I was waiting in the emergency room, I heard the leader of the Special Forces unit chatting with the front desk nurse. He knew that I was there and was coming to get me. Luckily, the doctor found me first and did not really know what to do with me, so he gave me 2 milligrams of Ativan and discharged me. So I drove home, still hallucinating and now somewhat affected by the Ativan, and I saw all types of crazy things on the way home. Once I got home, the Ativan mellowed the hallucinations into something almost pleasant, and I spent the rest of the weekend with playful hallucinations. I cannot really describe the fear of believing that Special Forces snipers were aiming at you for 2 hours straight. Story 5. Original poster. This is a great question, and I noticed no one was answering yet, so I will throw something in. First off, schizophrenia is the scariest disease in the world to me. If God came down and told me he had to give me a disease, I would say anything but schizophrenia. It is just that awful. I have nothing but compassion for people who have it and the families who are dealing with it. That being said, here is my story. Way back when I worked in social services, I had a client who had paranoid schizophrenia. He was a really smart guy who did great through college and went to graduate school at the top of his class. Around the age of 25, he started to become paranoid, having hallucinations of people watching him and trying to control him. By the time he became my client, he had very little left. He lived in a small shack in the woods. I went out to see him, and he was very upset because he felt like the airplanes going over his house, since he lived near an airport, were part of a government conspiracy to control him. He still had his college ring on that he got for graduating with honors. He said to me that he did not understand what the ring was for and that he did not remember. After all he had achieved, and despite how smart and gifted he was back in school, you could now only see remnants of that person. He was now a man barely hanging on, afraid to take his medication, with no memory of his former life and no family to take care of him. It was simply heartbreaking and terrifying. I still think about him and wonder what became of him. Story 6. No diagnosis here, but I have been suffering from constant delusions, paranoia, and hallucinations for the past 2 years. The scariest hallucination I have ever had took place in a Target. I was in the canned food aisle when I saw a little girl grab a can. There was nothing particularly unusual about it, and at first I figured it was just a girl getting something off the shelf for her mom. But then, after a while of standing there silently with the can in her hands, she turned around and stared at me with empty eye sockets. She opened the can and started chasing me around the store with the can lid, which is extremely sharp, and I started running through the store trying to escape. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it felt incredibly real. Eventually I tripped, and the next thing I knew, she handed me the can lid and was controlling my arms. I felt myself hurting myself and was basically screaming, but then I managed to snap out of it. When I came to, I was just standing there staring at the cans with tears streaming down my face. It was the most vivid hallucination I have ever had, and much scarier than the ones I experience every day. Story 7. Not schizophrenic, but I am bipolar, and I was investigated for schizophrenia while doctors were trying to diagnose me due to hallucinations. I initially heard what I thought was a broken radio, both in my home and in my car, for about 6 months. I had just moved house with my then boyfriend and was quick to dismiss noises I did not recognize. However, I began to be completely convinced that a couple were living in the garage and wanted to hurt me. I refused to ever go into the garage. The one time I did, with my significant other, he noted that a door was open, and I sprinted away with the flashlight and was halfway through texting his mother that he was probably dead when he came back in, understandably angry. A few months later, I had the scariest night of my life. I had just broken up with the same significant other for various reasons, including intense paranoia and panic. After telling him it was over, I went to the bathroom to cry. I looked down and my entire body appeared to be covered in spiders. I panicked. I could not turn to him for help, so I went back to the spare room. About an hour later, I heard two voices, roughly 20 centimeters behind me over my right shoulder, growling in unison that it was coming. Startled, I looked up and saw a tall black figure in the corner of the room, shaped like an extremely tall ceremonial guard and radiating something deeply threatening. At that point, I ran out of the room back to my significant other, who understandably kicked me back out. He later apologized and admitted he did not know what was happening and only knew that I was acting irrationally. I left the next day for 2 months. I moved back when my significant other left and have been mostly stable without many incidents since. I often describe bipolar disorder as getting brief samples of other mental illnesses, but with the luck of only experiencing them temporarily. My psychiatrist initially thought I had schizophrenia when I was first admitted, and if what I experienced was even half as bad as the full condition, I am eternally grateful that I do not have it. Story 8. My great-grandmother died because of her hallucinations. I was not alive then, but she apparently was not given appropriate care and ended up living on her own. She locked herself inside her house and was found dead weeks later. She believed people were trying to kill her, so she armed herself and became so terrified that she did not move, I assume, until she died. She was found with her legs severely damaged from the amount of times she had lost control of herself, and she had consumed quite a few bottles of whiskey. When her house was cleaned and sorted through, they also found dozens of stolen purses, with literally nothing taken from them. To me, that is the most terrifying way to die, being so convinced that people are coming to kill you that you starve yourself to death while slowly destroying yourself in fear. My cousin, who is my age, also has it. She frequently believes that she is more than human and has to go back to the hospital often because of psychotic episodes. From what I gather, she hears spirits and occasionally sees them. She has also had so many suicide attempts that it breaks my heart. It is hard to get close to her because sometimes she believes she is beyond human, and when she is in that state, although not scared, she isolates herself to the point of suicidal thoughts. I am grateful that in modern times we have more solutions for her, and I do not want her to end up like our great-grandmother. I sometimes fear that I may have symptoms as well, but not to that extent. It is mostly during manic swings of my bipolar disorder that I hear things and see things. I have never directly seen anything other than movement from the corners of my eyes, and I only hear inaudible whispers. But when it happens, it comes with an overwhelming fear of impending doom, which is the scariest part. Hearing whispers alone is manageable, but hearing whispers while being completely convinced you are about to die adds an entirely different level of terror. To be honest, what I should probably do is stop smoking weed, eating mushrooms, and experimenting with psychedelics, knowing full well that this condition may exist in my genetics. Story 9, not officially diagnosed with schizophrenia or anything specifically related to hallucinations, but I do frequently experience them. I should probably see someone, but they do not interfere with my ability to function, so I have mostly ignored it. When I spoke to my counselor many years ago, she told me that as long as the hallucinations were not telling me to do anything, they were not a major concern. Because of that, I feel like there is a dividing line between people who have hallucinations and people whose hallucinations actively interact with them. Most of the hallucinations I experience involve spiders crawling on my walls. Sometimes I will look over and see a giant spider, or thousands of tiny spiders moving along the wall. Other times there will be a normal-sized spider sitting in the corner, surrounded by an elaborate maze of webs. It usually happens at night while I am in bed or shortly after I wake up, which makes me think it is related to sleep. Another common one I experience is a specific series of knocks on my bedroom door. At first, these hallucinations terrified me, especially seeing large spiders on my wall. But over time, I learned to recognize the difference between reality and what my mind is producing. The problem is that even when I logically know what I am seeing is not real, I still see it. My brain still reacts as if something is there and needs to be addressed. That is what truly scares me. These hallucinations feel so real that they override logic and reason and make me act in ways I otherwise would not. If I heard someone knock on my door right now, I would get up and open it, even if I knew no one was actually there. That idea terrifies me. Why would I open a door for someone I know does not exist? Or grab bug spray for insects I know are not real? It makes me feel like I do not fully control my own actions or my own life. And that loss of control is far more frightening than any hallucination itself. Story 10, I have been treated for schizoaffective disorder for most of my life and have a documented family history of it. I take an antipsychotic and a mood stabilizer multiple times a day, so I believe that qualifies me to speak on this. I live in a quiet town in a particularly close neighborhood where everyone knows everyone else. One morning, I woke up feeling completely fine, drank my morning coffee, and walked to the door to let my cat outside. As I closed the door, I saw a fairly large man with no shirt on run at full speed into my neighbor's backyard and disappear behind the house. Immediately, I panicked, wondering why he was running and what he was doing in Brad's backyard at 7 in the morning without a shirt. The problem with delusions and hallucinations is that when you are experiencing one, it feels absolutely real with no doubt whatsoever. No matter how ridiculous the idea might sound afterward, at the time I was completely determined to find out who this man was. The police eventually arrested me in Brad's backyard while I was yelling and ranting in my boxers and a bathrobe about a man who did not exist, doing exactly what I was now doing. I know stories like this might sound less exciting than tales of ghosts or monsters, but real horror is watching your entire town see you taken away while you genuinely believed you were helping keep everyone safe. My greatest fear is not some imaginary creature, but the possibility that one day I will no longer be able to tell what is real at all. Story 11, I have mixed state bipolar disorder and Asperger's, which at times has progressed into full-blown psychosis. It is difficult to separate what is a hallucination and what is synesthesia, but either way, the effect can be frightening. For example, once on the ground floor of a hotel, I heard piano music coming from the lounge. But as I got closer and closer, the music transformed into what it actually was, a guitar and drums. I hear human voices in static, like the white noise from a computer, and even a light bulb that hums loudly enough will sound like two people arguing. When I close my eyes, I see fractals and kaleidoscope imagery until it fades to black. And then I begin to see rapid flash images of things I have seen since the last time I slept. Certain sounds create mental images, colors, shapes, and emotions. When I was in the early stages of psychosis, I heard a commercial for Windows 10, and I was knocked off my feet like a cartoon character and started screaming because the sound effect at the beginning of the commercial made me see 7 blinding lights that looked like they were going to crash into me. There are also lower-level hallucinations, like being convinced that every man on Earth is trying to kill me, or interpreting a sign that said exit to lobby with a pointing arrow as meaning something like, please leave the building before attempting to lobby for anything, with lobby meaning to argue, which left me frozen and mute while I could still see the sign clearly. Story 12. Schizoaffective disorder and bipolar 1. I have had many mild to moderately severe hallucinations, especially when I was undiagnosed or stopped taking my medication, so I will only describe the 2 worst episodes. My first major visual hallucination happened when I was 14 and undiagnosed. I was up late talking on the phone with a friend when I heard tapping on my window. I looked over and saw a completely glowing white hand making strange gestures and grabbing at the air. I completely panicked and ran downstairs to tell my parents that someone was breaking into our house. The important detail is that my bedroom was on the 3rd floor. My dad went outside to investigate anyway, but they brushed it off as a bad dream, since I also have night terrors. When I went back to my room, things were quiet for a while, but about an hour later, the hand was back, this time flailing violently as if its body were being shaken. It was horrifying, and I ended up sleeping in the bathroom that night. Months later, I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and bipolar 1, and I realized that what I had seen that night was a hallucination. The experience that affected me the most happened after I had an abortion. At first, I was emotionally okay with my decision because I was dealing with severe alcohol addiction, and my family has a very serious history of postpartum psychosis. I had read too many stories about mothers experiencing postpartum psychosis and harming themselves or their children, and I was convinced that I might do the same. 2 nights after the procedure, while I was sitting alone in my apartment, I heard faint crying. I thought it might be a cat or a child outside, even though it was 2 a.m. I checked the window and saw nothing, but then right behind me I heard a small girl's voice quietly ask Mommy. I turned around and saw a split-second image of a little girl wearing red with short black hair, like a camera flash that appeared and vanished instantly. I stood there in shock and then broke down crying uncontrollably. I am still affected by that hallucination to this day, and although I remind myself that my decision was the right one, the memory continues to carry a heavy emotional weight. Story 13. A demon appeared on a door on my balcony and said that I could not help it and that no one could help it. When I went inside, it moved up the wall onto the ceiling and told me it was coming back in 2 minutes to take me to hell. I started feeling a pulsing sensation move up my left arm, which led me to believe I was going to have a heart attack. When it came back, I was so terrified that I ran out of my apartment. What followed was a situation that lasted only about 2 days in real life, but within the delusion, the timeline stretched across 6 months. At some point during the night, the police used a taser on me about 10 miles from my home, and my heart ended up stopping. In the delusion, the demon had captured me and taken me to hell, where I was chained and forced to smash my head into a glass wall. In reality, I was in someone's backyard trying to break through their sliding glass door. Apparently, the homeowner tried to shoot me with a shotgun but missed. Eventually, in the delusion, I became too exhausted and collapsed. The demon kept telling me that everything would get worse if I did not continue, but I had no energy left and gave up. Two zombie-like Dobermans appeared and consumed my body from the neck down until I was nothing but bone. I watched my muscles and skin slowly grow back until I was whole again, and I was told to continue smashing the window with my head. The glass finally broke, and I fell onto the lower pane, which cut me in half. Instantly, I was transported into a room that was unbearably hot, where every breath felt like a desperate gasp, and I could not get enough air. Someone stood in front of me holding a glass of water covered in condensation, but I only had enough strength to crawl toward it. Every time I got close enough to touch the glass, the person stepped back. There was a clock on the wall, and I watched 6 months pass by. The only thought I had during this entire experience was that I was never getting out. I had no thoughts of my family or my past, only endless despair. Eventually, I managed to touch the glass, and I was transported to another place, a void where a massive black dragon with bright green eyes stood before me. The underside of its wings glowed the same bright green. It lowered its head, which was about 3 times the size of my entire body, and whispered that it was only going to get worse from there. Then it released black smoke from its nostrils that entered my ear. What followed can only be described as experiencing thousands of versions of myself, all suffering the most intense, mind-splitting pain imaginable at the same time, all inside my own head. I lost all sense of existence. Then I was in space, staring at the earth, and in my own voice I heard the words that I had created all of this. I woke up strapped to a hospital bed in the intensive care unit, covered in wounds and injuries. For a long time I was completely traumatized, but those final words changed my entire life. I now believe that reality is created by the mind, and knowing that has removed my fear. I think that when people die, their brain releases a massive amount of dimethyltryptamine, creating a time-distorted dream state, and whatever you are thinking before death becomes your experience. From the moment I saw the demon to the moment I woke up, only 2 days passed, but I experienced 6 months in hell. The second incident happened 3 years later. I had come to terms with the first experience and had not had anything severe happen in a long time. I was dating a woman I planned to marry, had a dog, and lived in a nice apartment in Southern California near the beach. Life was good. I work in television and photography, and I owned a small flexible tripod with bendable legs. One day while sitting on the couch watching television, the tripod began talking to me. My body felt like it moved on instinct, and I shaped the legs into a small humanoid figure. It told me its name was Ishvan Allah, and claimed I had already lived this life 1,000 times and that my training was beginning. My arms moved on their own, shaping the figure into different poses that matched what it was saying. At one point, it warned me that my girlfriend was about to walk through the door and that I needed to act normal. And seconds later, she did. It began predicting events. telling me about an invasion of a dragon-like species from space and showing me visions of a starship I would command, where my dog would lie and where my future wife would sit as co-captain. It showed me the destruction of Earth and countless dying faces. When I asked how to save them, it told me I would be given the power to escape with my girlfriend and my dog. When my girlfriend noticed something was wrong and said she wanted to go to her parents' house, the voice told me she would die if she left. I saw a vision of her parents' house in flames. It told me the only way to stop it was to restrain her until morning. I was horrified but completely convinced. I approached her and told her I loved her and that she would understand later. I restrained her, panicking and crying, until she escaped and ran for help. Neighbors came out, and the voice told me none of them mattered. In my delusional state, I physically fought several people before my girlfriend escaped and locked herself in another apartment. Sirens approached and the voice told me to avoid capture, then later told me the only way to save her was to let the police take me. I followed its instructions, evaded officers briefly, then allowed myself to be arrested. In the police car, I believed an attack was imminent and dismantled the seatbelt with my hands restrained. None of it was real. Hours later, sitting in a cell, I slowly realized what I had done. When I finally spoke to my girlfriend, she told me she forgave me and that it was not really me, but that it was over. I never saw her or my dog again. I moved across the country to start over, but the memory of that night follows me everywhere. I cannot make amends, and there is a restraining order in place. The hardest part is believing that I do not deserve another relationship after becoming someone I never thought I could be. I believed I was acting as a protector, but instead I became a source of fear. The mind is an incredibly powerful thing. Story 14. I started to experience hallucinations in high school. Since I had never had any reason to question my mental stability, I simply perceived everything I heard as real. It also did not help that I was raised Catholic and already had underlying beliefs about demons and similar concepts. It began with faint whispers in the background. I thought they were part of my own consciousness, like different thoughts expressing themselves without me actively thinking them. The whispers made me feel like an outcast, convinced me my friends were against me, and told me I was alone and isolated. As strange as it sounds, after hearing this repeatedly, I began to believe it. It completely altered my behavior, and I started doubting all my friends and distancing myself because I thought they were conspiring against me or faking their feelings. That is how hallucinations affected me at first. The scariest part came later. After about a year of ignoring the whispers, they became worse. I was extremely isolated, sometimes going weeks barely speaking to anyone because I fully believed everyone hated me. During that time, all I had were the whispers, which I had come to trust as my own thoughts revealing truths I could not otherwise see. Then the whispers changed into voices that sounded inhuman, booming, chilling, and commanding. They told me they were higher beings and that they now owned me. They said I was a pawn, but because I was an outcast, they felt some sympathy for me. They told me I needed to be placed back into society, and that the only way to do that was to deal with the people who disliked me. They convinced me that the negativity was coming from a former crush, and that by harming her, I would remove the source of the hatred. At first, I knew this was wrong, but after hearing it again and again, it started to make sense in a twisted way. I was desperate to feel safe around people again, and while I was never enthusiastic, I began to see hurting her as a necessary evil. I made a plan, but before anything could happen, I sent her a strange message that alarmed her. She contacted a hospital and an ambulance, and a police officer arrived at my house moments before I left with a knife in my hand. Looking back after treatment, that was the most terrifying experience of my life. Story 15. My mother has schizophrenia. She once called me during a hallucination while she was out walking near a military surplus store close to her home. The shop sold old military clothing, replica grenades, and similar items. Outside the store were mannequins dressed as soldiers and an old cannon beside them. Across the road, there was a billboard for the local news station. While she was walking past the store, she suddenly heard gunfire. In her mind, the mannequins had come to life and were shooting at her and preparing to fire the cannon. She panicked and started running. When she looked up at the billboard, she believed the news anchors pictured on it also had guns and were trying to kill her. She called me in complete terror and it frightened me badly because I thought someone was genuinely trying to harm her. She managed to get into a taxi during the call and was taken to a psychiatric ward where she stayed for several days, possibly up to a week, as best as I remember, since this happened around 15 years ago. I'm not sure if that was her worst hallucination, but most of her experiences involve people trying to kill her or plotting against her. Once she heard someone on the television say headshot at 12 o'clock, and afterward avoided sitting near windows around noon and midnight because she thought it was a warning that someone would shoot her in the head at 12 o'clock. She also frequently saw snakes. When I had my daughter, I sent my mother a picture of her eating baby food. She had carrots on her face and was sitting in her high chair. My mother called me crying because, to her, the picture showed my daughter dead, with blood around her mouth and a snake wrapped around her neck. Story 16, I believed I was chosen by God or the devil, and that I had to pay for every mistake and bad thing I had done in my life. This belief led me to wander aimlessly through a town I knew extremely well. Yet I kept getting lost and felt like I was walking in circles. I met random people and drank one or two beers with them, and after that, things became blurry. I ended up in jail for a weekend, believing the entire situation was a test created by humanity, God, or the devil to break me. I gave the police false information because I did not have my wallet or identification. Later, I learned that I had walked into a woman's house and tried to do laundry, which was why I was arrested. I was also charged with obstructing an officer. My parents eventually bailed me out after filing a missing persons report. I was still unmedicated and experiencing hallucinations and delusions for about another week. They involved religious themes mixed with conspiracies and extraterrestrial ideas. At one point, I became convinced that to atone for my sins, I had to end my life so that Jesus could live again. I attempted to harm myself multiple times with a blade, but could not go deep enough. I lost blood but was not hospitalized. I got my prescriptions the next day, and things slowly began to calm down, although paranoid thoughts and strange religious ideas lingered. A couple of weeks later, things finally evened out, but the experience still shakes me. Even on a normal day, I have unusual thoughts and an interest in conspiracy theories, which does not help, even though I am now medicated. I am grateful to still be alive and hope it never happens again. Story 17. Not schizophrenic, but I went through postpartum psychosis 3 months after having my son. It started with auditory hallucinations, hearing my son cry when he was not crying, staring at the baby monitor with no sound waves while still hearing him screaming. I knew what was happening was not real, but it still deeply affected me. After about 4 days, it became visual. I would see people vandalizing the car I was sitting in, but there were no marks, even though I was convinced the person was hiding from me whenever I got out. There were disturbing hallucinations involving my mother and Sewell objects that I still cannot talk about, and eventually it escalated to me hearing my brother tell his girlfriend things that led me to unintentionally disclose past Sewell abuse to my parents. When I finally reached my breaking point mentally, I went for a walk and became convinced that my son's father was stalking me in the neighborhood. I even asked a neighbor to call 911, which I deeply regret. That was my final straw, and I asked to be taken to the emergency room, where I continued to believe my son's father was coming to get me. The last thing I remember was telling a nurse that I had taken a narcotic, which I had hallucinated and had not actually taken. I was later told that I attacked nurses, bit one of them, and ripped out her earring. Thinking about this still fills me with guilt. Writing this brings back all the shame I felt after being released from treatment. To anyone who recognizes these events, I am deeply sorry. I had not slept more than 3 hours a night for 3 months, and in the days leading up to this episode, I had not slept at all. Please take care of yourself after having a baby, because it can lead to severe mental health complications. It has been 2 years and I am doing infinitely better now, but I have been told it gets worse with each child, so I do not believe I will have more children. Story 18. I am schizophrenic, and the illness manifests in many different ways. I am not ashamed of my diagnosis and am actually grateful for it. I suppose I am a glass half full type of person, so I see things differently. When I was young, I saw beautiful angels everywhere, protecting me from demons trying to get in through the windows. You know how as a child you run up the stairs after grabbing a snack in the middle of the night to escape the ghosts downstairs? My angels always protected me from the evil outside. I was never agoraphobic, just nervous about opening doors to ugly creatures. The spirits followed me outside too. When I felt uneasy, I would see a woman in a white dress with smooth facial features who radiated love. I do not see them often anymore, but when I do, it feels like a warm, tight hug, like pure energy that can only be described as love. As a teenager, my hormones worsened my hallucinations. I would hear classmates talking and think everything they said was about me. I would tell them to speak louder and say it to my face, and they had no idea what I was talking about. I also smoked a lot of weed during that time, which made my auditory hallucinations worse. I thought even my teachers were talking behind my back. I saw tall, faceless, dark figures that followed me everywhere, but the angels protected me. I rarely saw them during the day, but at night they formed a protective barrier around me. In daily life, I felt kisses on my neck from things that were not there, felt bugs in my hair until I scratched my scalp raw. And when I closed my eyes, I saw vivid images of demons coming for me. I barely slept and felt like I was losing my mind. I was often caught talking to myself, which I still do, because some of my voices are genuinely funny. As an adult, I know I am not normal. I take medication that helps, but I will never be a typical person. Sometimes I hate the medication because I miss my hallucinations. Not the demons, but the angels and the voices that made me laugh. Medication can make hallucinations disappear forever or replace them with worse ones. I felt more creative before the medication, able to lose myself in art or music completely. Now life feels flat and routine. I no longer live in fear of demons, but I miss the angels who made me feel protected. My schizophrenia made me feel both safe and vulnerable. Now I feel like I have no shield at all. I think it was a coping mechanism I built to survive hardship, and now it is collapsing under reality. I do not even know what reality is, because I have lived in another world my entire life, one that feels real to me, but has always been dismissed by others. I struggle to trust anyone around me, and sometimes do not even believe people are real. After writing this, I honestly feel like stopping my medication again. I love who I am, including my schizophrenia. Story 19. My scariest hallucinations are the ones where I see eyes forming everywhere. I do not experience hallucinations as intense as some people, but I do see dead individuals, often bodies of people who ended their lives or were violently injured. Seeing eyes appear everywhere unsettles me the most. The eyes form into faces and then into bodies, and before I realize it, my entire vision and my home are filled with eyes, partial faces, or full figures staring at me. The aftermath is just as distressing because I start actively searching for eyes. Every time I see eyes, even those of a dog, I feel like they are watching me or coming for me. I cannot make eye contact or be around people, except for two individuals I deeply trust and who know about my hallucinations. With them, I can look into their eyes and feel okay, as long as their face appears normal. Another terrifying experience happened the first time I took Wellbutrin, which can cause hallucinations. During that episode, I saw everything I did not want to see, everything that frightened or traumatized me. I felt nails digging into my body and dragging down from my chest to my feet. I relived past trauma, including events that were delusions themselves. I would lock my door and watch the handle slowly turn as the door opened to reveal something standing behind it. I could hear the sound of the door opening, and to this day, even seeing or hearing a door makes my heart race. I hide under the covers as voices whisper my name, shifting from normal tones to demonic ones, while something beneath the covers grabs my foot and tries to pull me into darkness. I keep my phone on and scroll through Reddit, desperately looking for distraction, only to see letters morph into symbols or messages meant for me, and images that look like photos of myself, as if I am being watched. The hallucinations themselves are terrifying, but the anticipation afterward is worse. Waiting for something abnormal to appear and it not happening makes me panic, because I start wondering what is coming next. It is hell. Even typing this is triggering a panic response. These past months have been unbearable, and I did not realize how badly I needed to write this out, so thank you for asking. Story 20. I am not schizophrenic, but my father was. Some of my earliest memories are of him telling me to get down because a car was passing by our front window, believing that the people inside the cars were watching him. I would have to sneak around the house for the rest of the night until he finally calmed down. He was not always extremely paranoid, but every so often he would have episodes where he believed everything was out to get him. My father heard voices, though I never found out whether he also saw things. When I was older, I sat down with him and asked who he thought was talking to him and what they were saying. He told me there were multiple voices, most of them demons telling him they were going to kill his family, that everyone hated him, that he could not trust anyone, and that he was going to die alone. He said they constantly whispered in his ears and sometimes argued with each other. One voice would say not to tell his son anything, while another would say that I was his son and he could trust me, only for the first voice to threaten that if he told me anything, they would kill me. The voices talked over one another, and he could not always understand everything he heard. My father was very religious, so to him these voices were demons trying to pull him further away from God. He did not talk about it much, and I did not even learn that he had schizophrenia until I was around 20 years old, when I started asking him about the medication he was taking. The way he acted after taking Seroquel worried me, because he would walk around half awake, barely able to speak, and would often make a mess. I wanted him to stop taking it, but when he told me it helped silence the voices and allowed him to sleep, I stopped pressing him about it. Story 21. I am not schizophrenic, at least as far as I know, but I do occasionally see things, especially in the dark. I have experienced this for as long as I can remember, and because of that I grew up thinking it was normal, so I never really questioned it. Most of the time it involves very tall figures standing and staring at me. When I was a child it terrified me, but eventually I learned that if I focused hard enough I could make them disappear, until one time when they did not. I was 20 years old, living alone in an apartment, and I woke up to find the television turned off, even though I had fallen asleep with it on. I rolled over and realized I was completely surrounded by these figures. Most of them were around 8 feet tall, and there were at least a dozen standing over my bed and around the room, far more than I had ever seen at once. I could not clearly see their features, but their heads were unnaturally tall. At first I was shocked, but then I closed my eyes and focused, expecting them to vanish. When I opened my eyes again, they were still there, and now they were moving, which my hallucinations never normally do. I panicked and tried again to make them disappear, but it did not work. Just before I started screaming, their bodies seemed to melt into the walls and vanish. What still disturbs me the most is that my television had been turned off. Everything else I can explain away as hallucinations, but I know for certain the television was off, and even though there are logical explanations, it still makes me wonder if something else was there. Story 22. I had a particularly disturbing hallucination while under the influence of lysergic acid diethylamide and synthetic cannabis. I was 16 or 17 years old, taking the public bus to and from charter school, and at the time I was deeply interested in altered states of consciousness. Hallucinations were something I was familiar with, and I believed I could always tell what was real and what was not. I would wake up, drink my coffee, take the long bus ride, and once I reached the downtown library, I would take 1 or 2 doses and wait for it to take effect on the rest of the ride. One afternoon after school, while coming down and walking to the bus stop, I decided to smoke under a bridge. Almost immediately, I felt that something was very wrong, like my brain was malfunctioning. I climbed out from under the bridge and started walking, and along the way I convinced myself there was a bee inside my shoe. I panicked, ripped the shoe off, and found nothing, so I blamed it on the substance and kept walking. About 15 feet from the bus stop, I felt it again, but this time the sensation changed into something far worse, as if the tips of my feet were unraveling like thread and would continue upward if I did not stop it, which I believed would mean certain death. I completely lost control and checked my watch, realizing I had about 45 minutes until the next bus. I told myself to use the time to calm down, but what felt like only a few minutes turned into an hour, and I watched the bus drive away. In confusion, I ran past it, reached the next stop ahead of it, and managed to get on without further incident. In the chaos, I forgot about the sensation in my feet, and it never returned. After that experience, I significantly reduced my use of psychedelics, because during that episode, I could no longer clearly distinguish what was real and what was not, and I felt dangerously close to a substance-induced psychosis. Story 23. I am not personally schizophrenic, but my girlfriend was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia at a young age. She has also been diagnosed with psychosis by another professional, so there has been some uncertainty about where exactly she falls diagnostically. She hears things constantly, but it is the visual hallucinations that affect her the most, even though they happen less often. The first time I witnessed one of her visual hallucinations deeply shook me. We were lying in bed together when she suddenly sat upright, visibly startled, and asked me if I could see that. I asked her what she was seeing, and she told me there was a hand on the foot of the bed, long and bony, reaching out from under the bed and resting on the mattress. I tried to reassure her that there was nothing there, but she could not take her eyes off it. Then she began to panic completely, screaming, trying to move away, covering her ears and shaking. It took a long time to calm her down. Later, she told me that the hand belonged to a creature, something straight out of a horror movie, with long skeletal limbs. She said it had pulled itself up and started crawling onto the bed toward her. She was curled up, screaming, as this distorted creature climbed closer. That moment really hit me. I cannot imagine how terrifying it must be to be perfectly fine one moment, lying in bed talking, and then suddenly see something like that emerge from beneath your bed and come for you. I honestly do not know how she lives with it. Story 24. My mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia after an episode when I was 8 years old. I was sleeping peacefully in bed with her and my father, because I was terrified of sleeping alone at that age, when I was suddenly awakened by what sounded like a loud dog barking right next to me. It turned out to be my mother. She jumped violently out of bed, briefly barking at the foot of the bed in the pitch dark, and then ran out of the room as if something were chasing her. My father woke up in a panic and ran after her to see what was happening, only to nearly be attacked by her before she partially came back to her senses. Later at the hospital, she explained that she believed deadly gas was being released from the glow in the dark decorations we had put on the wall earlier that day, and that she was suffocating. She also saw camera flashes everywhere. Convinced that my father was an intruder attacking her, she reacted in what felt to her like self-defense, and then cried when she realized she had almost hurt her own husband. This episode happened during a period when she constantly complained that people were following her and talking about her in the mall, and that people were entering our home to install cameras to monitor her disability benefits. When asked why no one else saw these things, she claimed that my father and I were regularly being sedated by the intruders before they carried out their work. The experience left deep psychological scars on me at 8 years old, and it has been devastating to watch a once healthy, sociable woman become a reclusive prisoner inside her own home for over 2 decades. It has been nearly impossible to get her help, because she is still convinced that nothing is wrong with her. I want to add that reading stories like these has given me an even deeper respect for people who live with hallucinations. Story 25. I am schizoaffective, bipolar type, and my hallucinations usually only appear when I am extremely stressed or fall into a deep low. A few years ago, while driving to work, I heard a woman whispering in my ear, telling me to crash my truck, telling me to just end it because no one would care. I snapped out of it just as I was heading toward a tree. I checked myself into the hospital and spent a week in the psychiatric ward, followed by an intensive outpatient program for a couple of months. The last hallucination I experienced during that time was so subtle and seemingly harmless that it sounds ridiculous, but it remains the scariest one to me. I was living with my mother, stepfather, and sister, staying in the basement. I came upstairs around midnight or 1 in the morning to get something from the fridge. When I turned around, I saw a cat casually walking across the kitchen floor, completely ignoring me, before rounding the corner. I followed it, and it simply vanished. We have never owned a cat. We had a dog, but she was upstairs, locked in my sister's room. All the doors were shut, locked, and secured. I told my psychiatrist the next time I saw him, and he was not particularly concerned. In fact, no one was. Years earlier, when my hallucinations first began, I had heard a woman screaming that someone was dead, followed by a shrieking sound like a train in a subway tunnel. That entire summer, I was never truly alone. I heard a father and son hiking through thick brush 2 miles from any road or trail, talking to each other, and when I looked, no one was there. There was always a low background chatter, like a crowd murmuring before a church service, and when I changed what I was doing, it would suddenly go silent, only to return again later. Despite all of that, it is still the image of that silent, ordinary cat that unsettles me the most to this day. Story 26. When I was about 15 years old, I had a bunkmate with schizophrenia while I was in an inpatient psychiatric evaluation wing, a smaller version of the long-term unit with a few large bedrooms that each held between 4 and 8 beds. Her bed was next to mine in one of the larger rooms. She was tall and strong for her age, which is important to the story. The main thing I experienced was that she would suddenly leap out of bed at random times during the night, at least once every couple of nights, because she believed she was seeing a swarm of bats attacking her. She would scream and violently flail her arms, trying to swat them away and shield her head, reacting exactly as someone would if it were actually happening. She did this with a lot of force, and the screaming and stomping would wake the other patients, many of whom were terrified. I was scared too, but I was one of the few people close to her size and figured that an accidental hit would not be the worst thing. I never touched her, but I would try to talk to her, calm her down, and ground her in reality. Nothing ever seemed to work. She would keep going until the nurses rushed in with Thorazine and a stretcher with ankle and wrist restraints to take her to the quiet room. I felt horrible for her. I suffer from panic attacks, so I understand something about overwhelming fear that feels completely out of your control, even if I did not fully understand her experience. I could see how genuinely terrified she was, and there was nothing I could do to help, even standing right next to her. I was just another troubled 15-year-old and not a therapist. This was over 15 years ago, and I never saw her again after I left the evaluation wing. When she was doing well, she was kind, strong, and friendly, and she spent time drawing with the other patients in the cafeteria. Once we drew portraits of each other. I asked her to draw me as I looked, and when I asked her to let me draw her, she described in great detail a person who was the complete physical opposite of her in every way. Essentially everything she wanted to be, but was not. It looked like a fantasy character, similar to something from Sailor Moon, and that was how she wanted me to draw her. I did, but it made me feel deeply sad. I wanted to include that because it felt like it showed how her mind worked during that time. She was a beautiful person, and I truly hope she was able to get the help she deserved. Story 27, I was never officially diagnosed with anything because I never saw a professional, but from about 2 to 10 years old, I experienced a massive anatomically correct eyeball, complete with nerve endings, that followed me around. It was about the size of a balloon and did nothing but stare at me. Yet it absolutely terrified me. I was being abused by my father at the time, and the eye would usually appear during periods of extreme stress. When I was 10, we fled the state to escape my biological father. After that, the eyeball still appeared occasionally during my teenage years, maybe once or twice a year, showing up outside a window or in my closet. I am almost 30 now, and a few months ago, during a very difficult pregnancy, I saw a tiny eye peering at me through a cracked door. Over the past 2 years, I have also experienced moments where I look in the mirror and panic because I do not recognize my own reflection. These episodes last about 5 to 10 minutes. The first time it happened, I nearly screamed, convinced someone had stolen my body, until something clicked and I realized it was me. It is still unsettling when it happens, but now I recognize it and simply avoid mirrors until it passes. Mental illness runs on both sides of my family. My biological father and his mother both had antisocial personality disorder and were extremely controlling and cruel. We left after he tried to kill us, and he had abused me as punishment for my mother leaving him years earlier. Yet the court still tried to force visitation because he appeared to be a devoted father. On my mother's side, my great-grandmother and great-great-great-grandmother both had severe hallucinations involving bugs and shadow figures. Story 28. I have bipolar disorder with psychosis, not schizophrenia, but I still experience both visual and auditory hallucinations. I also struggle with conversion disorder, so at times I become randomly paralyzed or unable to speak. The worst episode happened when I could not move at all. I saw spiders crawling all over me and across my bed. I wanted nothing more than to get up and run away, but I was completely unable to move. It felt like they were taking tiny bites out of me, not enough to break the skin, but enough to feel like needles piercing me all over my body. This lasted for about half an hour. Eventually, I was able to shout, then stand, and I immediately ran to the shower to wash them off. It was only once I was in the shower that I realized it was not real. There were no spiders washing down the drain and no bite marks on my skin. Even now, the memory is so vivid that it feels like a real experience rather than a hallucination. The other especially awful one was auditory. I had a voice that followed me almost everywhere, repeatedly saying, "Death brings hope," and urging me to end my life or hurt others. Sometimes it said more, but that phrase was constant. Because of the content, I knew it was not real, since no one in real life follows you around saying things like that. I managed to ignore it, but it would not leave me alone, and it took several weeks before it finally stopped. It is incredibly difficult to focus on normal life when you are constantly being told to die. Hallucinations are exhausting and terrifying. Story 29. Not me, but I once found myself sitting in court because I was assigned to a judge during law school. The accused was a man with schizophrenia who appeared completely normal during the trial because he was back on his medication. But a few months earlier, he had stopped taking it and killed his girlfriend. That night, just before sleeping, they were lying in bed together. She was on her phone while he was hallucinating. She did not know what was happening, but he later described seeing a light jumping back and forth between him and her and hearing the voice of his father, who was actually sleeping upstairs. The voice told him to kill his girlfriend because she was a demon and would otherwise kill him. At some point, his girlfriend reached out and touched his hair, and he snapped. He grabbed her by the neck, threw her off the bed, got on top of her, and strangled her. He kicked her chest several times and did not stop, even though the court physician later stated that she was already brain dead by that point. The voice of his father then told him to stab her, so he went to the kitchen, grabbed a 30-centimeter knife, and stabbed her with such force that the tip hit the floor beneath her and became lodged. The scene was horrific, but all he felt was pride and relief, because in his mind, he had just killed a demon that was about to kill him. When he left the room, his real father came downstairs, and the accused told him that she had stopped breathing. The father was confused and horrified. When the police arrived, the accused was sitting at the kitchen table, bewildered that his father was not proud of him for doing what he believed he had been told to do. He genuinely did not understand that he had killed his girlfriend of 3 years. According to the testimony, he had been hearing different voices in the weeks prior, but none of them were hostile. They helped him when he got lost or gave him advice. That night was when everything changed, and the court physician explained that while most people with schizophrenia harm themselves rather than others, this progression is still considered a known pattern. Story 30. This does not exactly answer the question, but this is my experience with schizophrenia through my cousin. She has been struggling for almost exactly 10 years now. At first, she was diagnosed as schizoaffective, and now they simply label her schizophrenic. I have not seen her since the beginning because we do not live close, and we are not particularly close as a family, and she barely leaves the house now. But I get regular updates. She hears voices that she believes are aliens, and originally thought she had been chosen to receive special information. She has said she likes the voices, which makes it very difficult to get her to take her medication. We all knew something was wrong, but one day she stole her mother's car and tried to drive across the country to stay with a woman she had only met once the week before. The family panicked because she was alone, driving somewhere unknown, with a mind that was clearly not functioning normally. Thankfully, the woman she was trying to reach turned out to be incredibly kind. She contacted my cousin, who was avoiding her parents, and paid to fly her to her home. When my cousin arrived, her mother was already there and eventually took her home after a few days. It has now been 10 years, and it has been devastating. They have never been able to get the medication right. When the medication quiets the voices, it either makes her sleep all day, becomes suicidal, or causes other severe issues. They have been trying different treatments constantly, and it feels worse now than ever. She has said she does not want to live and recently attempted suicide. The only small relief was that she was involuntarily committed until her father allowed her to leave. I see him as enabling her, even though I know it comes from love and not being able to watch her suffer. She is an only child and her parents are older. This situation has destroyed their marriage. It is heartbreaking